The Kutu Sikh is Chelek Chav Zayin, the Sikh of Shemini Aleph, Leila Nishmas Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin ben Rabbi Menashe Kaltman. We're also learning the Schus, our dear friend Yosef Shlomo ben Risha, for Refuah Shleimo Kreva. The Sikha is a discussion in a Rambam and in a Gemara in Masechta Shavuos about a Tamei person that enters into the Mikdash, or rather, a person that is in the Beis HaMikdash and discovers that he is Tamei and must go out immediately. Before I begin the Sikha, I would like to give an introduction about the Gemara and the Rambam that we're going to talk about. So, the Gemara is a Gemara in Masechta Shavuos, Daf Tes Zayin Amud Beis, and over there, the Mishnah had said that a person that is Tamei, meaning to say he went into the Beis HaMikdash when he was Tahir, and then he became Tamei in the Beis HaMikdash, he has to go out immediately. Says the Mishnah that if he shtachava, if he bowed in the Beis HaMikdash while being Tamei, or he lingered the amount of time it takes to bow, then he's chayiv. And he's chayiv either karis if it was b'mezid, or a chatos if it was b'shoigig, because that is the transgression. In other words, once he discovers he's tamei, he has to go out right away. If he bows, he does an avodah of some sort in the Beis HaMikdash, or he lingers there, he spends time over there, and when he's not allowed to be there, he's chayiv for this transgression. The Gemara there's two parts of the Gemara that we're going to focus on. One is the Gemara that brings the opinion of Rava. Rava introduces another form of bowing. If the person was facing the exit, Ma'ariv side, west, when he bowed, so it's not really considered bowing. But nevertheless, the Gemara is going to bring two Lashonos, two different approaches within Rava that tell us that if the person was facing the wrong direction when he bowed, then if he did so without any extra time, then because he was facing the other way, he's not chayiv. But if he lingered while bowing, then it's as if he bowed in the Beis HaMikdash, and he's chayiv for doing that. There's two different ways of understanding Rava, which both seem to come to the same conclusion, and the Rebbe is going to explain to us what's the difference between the two Lashonos. Then the Gemara continues, how much is the amount of time of Shehiyah, of lingering? So the Gemara brings a machlokes, where referencing a pasuk in Divrei Hayamim about when the Beis HaMikdash was built, where the pasuk says that all the Yidden could see as the fire came down and the glory of Hashem was on the Beis HaMikdash, and they prostrated themselves and they bowed and they praised Hashem and thanked Him for His kindness. That's the pasuk in Divrei Hayamim. We'll see the actual Hebrew of the pasuk in the Sikha, and the two opinions in the Gemara, at least at first glance, is one opinion says the amount of time it takes to say the whole pasuk, and in a second opinion, the amount of time it takes to say half the pasuk from the word vayichru, from the word that they bowed. Now, obviously, the more time you get, the more lenient you are. So the first opinion is more lenient. It gives the person more time before he's chayiv, the time it takes to say the whole pasuk. Whereas the second opinion says only half the pasuk. Once you say it, once you spend enough time in the Beis HaMikdash to have said the second half of the pasuk, you're chayiv. Those are the parts of the Gemara that are going to be relevant to the Sikha. We're also going to discuss this and learn this from the perspective of the Rambam. The Rambam, this is Hilchas Bias HaMikdash, Perek Gimel, Halacha Chaf Aleph through Chaf Gimel. So at the end of Halacha Chaf Aleph, the Rambam says, and we'll see this in the Sikha, that someone went into the Beis HaMikdash and became Tamei, then even if he made himself Tamei, Yemahir v'yiboyel v'yitzav derech tzara, he should rush eagerly and go out in the shortest possible way. Then in Halacha Chav Beis, the Rambam says, you're not allowed to linger over there, you're not allowed to bow over there, nor are you allowed to go out in a longer than necessary route. And if he did linger, or he did go out in a longer route, Even though he didn't pause at any point, he just went, but he went to a further exit. Or he bowed while facing the heichal, which is the proper way of bowing, even though it didn't take him any extra time. Chayiv kares is chayiv kares, maybe carbon, and if it was b'shegig, if it was not a deliberate act, then he brings a carbon. In Halacha Chav Gimel, the Rambam introduces a new case, a new instance, that which Rava was speaking about in the Gemara. Lo yachzir panov, ela yishtachva derech yitziasei klapi chutz. He didn't turn around to face the Kodesh HaKadoshim. He bowed down while on his way out, facing the exit. Ein chayiv, then he's not chayiv, says the Rambam. Elim kein shah kishir, unless while bowing he waited a certain amount of time. How much is the time of waiting that would make him chayiv for bowing in this direction while being tummy? Kedei likre, says the Rambam, the amount of time it takes to read the pasuk vayichru apayim arza al haritzpa v'yishtachvu v'edas Hashem kitev kidalam chazdei. The second part of the pasuk, they bow down on their face to the ground. They prostrated themselves and they thanked Hashem for His goodness forever. And then the Rambam ends, V'zeu shir ishtachavoya, and this is also the amount of bowing for which the person will become chayiv when he bows, when he's bowing, even if he's facing the exit of the Beis Hamikdash. So let us look inside the Sikha. Let us begin. We're going to begin by analyzing the Rambam. From the Rambam, we're going to go to the Gemara. And once we understand the Gemara, we will then understand the Rambam a little bit better. In Hilchas Beis Hamikdash, the Rambam, as when Einer is nitbek bar Hamikdash is their din. In Hilchas Beis Hamikdash, the Rambam says that if somebody became tamei, became ritually unclean while he was in the Beis Hamikdash, is their din. The din is as yimaher v'yibohel v'yetze b'derech ktsara. He should rush and get out of the Beis Hamikdash in the shortest possible way. Then the next halacha, it is forbidden for this person to tarry, to linger in the Beis Hamikdash, or to bow, or to go out in a longer route, which means even if he's the whole time he's heading outward, but if there's a closer exit and he chooses a further exit, that is not allowed. Later, what is the amount of time? We said you're not allowed to delay. You're not allowed to linger. So what is the amount of lingering or bowing? Paskin the Rambam makamashir sheyasei kedei likreis vayichru apayim arza al haritzpa v'yishtachvu v'hedes laHashem kitev kedelim chazdei v'zeu shir ishtachavoya. To read the pasuk vayichru from vayichru till the end. Later we'll see that there's a beginning part to this pasuk. And this is the shir of Ishtachavaya. That's the Rambam that we're going to focus on. Zok the Kesef Mishnah. The Kesef Mishnah, a commentator on the Rambam, says as follows. The Makar for Divrei Rambam is in Masechta Shvuos. The source of the Rambam is in the Gemara Masechta Shvuos. Vu state where it says, Kam Shir Shia, what is the amount of Shia? What is the amount of lingering that makes him chayiv? Pligi bar Rav Yitzchak bar Nachmani v'chad de'imei. Rav Yitzchak bar Nachmani argued with someone with him. Chad Omar Kememre Dahai Psuke, one says the amount of time it takes to say this pasuk. Chad Omar Ki Mivayichru L'Seifa. And the second opinion is from the word Vayichru to the end. What's the pasuk they're referring to? V'chol b'nei Yisrael royim beredes ha'esh uchved Hashem al habayis v'yichru apayim arza al haritzpa v'yishtachvu v'hedes l'Hashem kitev kilam chasdi. That is the pasuk. The Yidden saw as the fire came down and the glory of Hashem came down onto the Beis Hamikdash. They prostrated themselves upon their face on the floor. They bowed and they thanked Hashem for His kindness. And this is actually one of the connections of this sikha to this parsha, because it is in this parsha Shemini where we learn about the Shechina coming down onto the Mishkan on the 8th day after they concluded all of the work that was meant to be done. So the Kesef Mishnah has a question. Das was the Rambam paskin lachmer k'mandomer miviyichru l'seife v'le k'mandomer k'memer dai psuke demashmer k'memer l'kule psuke mereshivat seife. The Rambam seems to be machmer, because if you say the whole pasuk, and the first opinion says k'memer dai psuke, it sounds to have to say the whole pasuk. It's more time. So you're giving the guy more time to get out before he's chayiv. The Rambam paskins from Vayichru, which seems to be a more lenient, a more stringent opinion, because you're giving him less time. What's the problem with the Rambam being stringent? Because since there's a suffix over here, we don't know what to paskin. Like we have to paskin to the more lenient opinion, because otherwise we might be overly stringent and then end up bringing a carbon, which is not really a carbon, into the Beis Hamikdash. So if in a case where we don't know what the halacha is, sveike lekula, the doubt causes us to be lenient. So the Kesef Mishnah is asking, why is the Rambam being machmir? Why is the Rambam being more stringent here? Whenever the Kesef Mishnah, so the Kesef Mishnah says that the first opinion in the Gemara that says the words to say the pasuk, which we understood it to mean the entire pasuk, possibly he means to say from the beginning of the pasuk till the words vayichru. Which would mean that the second opinion that says you start from vayichru till the end, which is more words, the second opinion is the more lenient opinion. Upasa kavasei, and the Rambam passes is like the more lenient opinion. So the Kesef Mishnah is teaching that the first opinion in the Gemara that says kememre dahai psuke doesn't mean to say the entire pasuk; it means to say the first part of the pasuk. The second opinion also say the second part of the pasuk. The second part of the pasuk is longer, which means that the second opinion is the more lenient opinion, and the Rambam follows the paskins like the more lenient opinion. The Kesef Mishnah continues. The Gemara in Yerushalmi asks a similar question. What is the amount of bowing? Rabbi Simon b'shem Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi ad kedei vayichru apayim arza al harizpa. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, Rabbi Simon and Rabbi Levi says, only the words vayichru apayim arza al harizpa vayishtachvu. Just the middle of the pasuk. That's it. Not the beginning, not the end, the middle. Rabbi Moisif adds that you also say the end of the pasuk, which means you would say the middle and the end. So the first opinion in the Yerushalmi says you say the middle, not the beginning, not the end, just the middle. Second opinion in the Yerushalmi says you say the middle and the end, the second part of the pasuk. And according to this, the Kesef Mishnah says that since the opinion of Reb Simon is that you only say the middle of the pasuk, the Kesef Mishnah says that you possibly can say that when in the Gemara in Bavli, where it says that you say this pasuk, he means only the middle. Now, in the first explanation of the Kesef Mishnah, he says that means the beginning of the pasuk. The second answer of the Kesef Mishnah is that the person who says Kememre Dai Psuka is saying that you only say Vayichru Apayim Arza L'Ritzpa Veishtachvu. The Hashtem Havim and the Omer Vayichru L'Sefer Mekel, which would mean that the one who says that you start from Vayichru, you go to the end, is more lenient because he's giving you more time, more words. And because of the suffix, who should you paskin like? The Rambam paskins the most lenient opinion. So this is how the Kesef Mishnah explains the Rambam. That since the Gemara, when it says K'mei Medahai Psuka, either it means the beginning of the pasuk, or it means the middle of the pasuk, and there's opinion that says that you say the middle and the end of the pasuk, which is the most lenient opinion. The Rambam paskins like the lenient opinion and gives you the most time of Shehiyah before your Chayv. But the Kesef Mishnah needs to be understood, as many of the Mefarshim ask on the Kesef Mishnah. First of all, the Erster Teretz as K'mei Medahai Psuka made not as Chalatz HaKosuf. What is the source to say that when the opinion in the Gemara, the Mandamar says that you say the pasuk, it means only the beginning of the pasuk? Says Nita in Gemara came as most of them. There seems to be no implication in the Gemara that that's what it means. It says K'mei Dahai Psuka, like saying this pasuk. It doesn't say part of this pasuk, the beginning of this pasuk. And the second explanation of the Rambam, of the Kesef Mishnah, that it means the middle of the pasuk. So besides the question of Mehechetesa, which applies here as well, we have another Tarchiyun. We have to understand, why does the Gemara bring the whole pasuk? In the second version, the second answer to the Kesef Mishnah, nobody holds that you say the beginning of the pasuk. One opinion holds you say the middle of the pasuk. One opinion holds you say the middle and the end. But nobody holds that you say the beginning. So why would the Gemara bring the beginning of the pasuk in the Gemara? In the first answer of the Kesef Mishnah, at least, the first opinion held, you say the beginning of the pasuk. Second opinion held, you say the second part of the pasuk. So therefore, he brings the whole pasuk, so you know what each person has to say. But mit bringing the ganzen pasuk, the Gemara gar says him. Over here, the Gemara, by bringing the whole pasuk, the Gemara is actually confusing us because the Gemara is giving us more information than we need. So the question becomes, why would the Gemara bring the whole pasuk? How do you fit in to the words that it means only the middle words of the pasuk, not the beginning, not the end? It doesn't say anything. It says the pasuk. So these are the questions we have in the Kesef Mishnah. Number one, if the Gemara says how do you know that it means anything less than the whole pasuk? Number two, according to the second answer, that the discussion here is that one opinion holds that you say only the middle words, and the second opinion holds that you say the middle and the end. Why would the Gemara bring the whole pasuk? So in Sif Beis, the Rebbe is going to bring in the Rambam, and the reason earlier I shared the Seder in the Rambam, because the Seder in the Rambam, the order in which the Rambam teaches this to us, is going to be negea to understand the Rebbe's questions. But first we have to understand the Rambam. Aleph Adiyuk and Divrei Rambam Anal. Number one, we have to look in to the words of the Rambam. The Rambam says, "V'kama shir shi yaseh." In other words, the Rambam had just said that if the person bowed facing the opposite direction, facing the exit, then he's not chayiv unless he was shah kashir, unless he stayed there, he bowed for a certain amount of time. Then the Rambam says, "V'kama shir shi yaseh." How much is this amount? It's the amount of time of reading the pasuk Vayichru. And then the Rambam says, "V'zeu shir shtachavaya." This is the amount of bowing. So the question is, why does the Rambam subdivide this into two separate elements? Shir shihiyasei, the amount of lingering, and then at the end, v'zeu shir shtachavaya, and then say, and this is also the amount of bowing. Why couldn't he say in the beginning, just like in the beginning he compared Shia and Ishtachava, how much is the Shir of Shia and the Shir of Ishtachava? The amount of tarrying and the amount of bowing. And answer that it's the amount of time to read the pasuk. 1 second. Before you say, it's a good question. Look back in the Rambam. And even though the Rambam is bringing this up after saying the words that if a person bowed facing the exit, he's only chayiv if he was shah kashir. And on this, the Rambam said, "V'kama shir yaseh." How much is the shir of lingering? So it makes sense why he focuses on the shihiyah, because he just said shah kashir. But it does gufin it move on. If you're going to answer to me that's why the Rambam says kama shir yaseh, because he just said shah kashir, that in itself is not understood. The way that Rambam should have said was that if he bowed facing the exit, he's not chayiv unless he lingered the amount of time it takes to bow. And then he should have immediately asked the kama shi'ura, or the kama shi'ur tachavoy, and then how much is that? Or how much is the amount of bowing? Because and answers the amount of time to read the pasuk. Und demol hat es gewend behessen Lashna Mishnah, hishtachava oish shah bichtei hishtachava. That would have also fit in very nicely with the Mishnah, where the Mishnah puts side by side bowing or delaying while bowing. Beis. Here's the second question on the Rambam. The pastors gave Divrei Rambam. The kama shir shiyasek dechulu nit not of dvarav balach azu lehechzer panav aleishtachva derech yitziyasei klape chutz einechai velim ken shah kashir. The amount of shihiyah, the amount of lingering that the Rambam gives us in this halacha is not just applicable in the case where the person was bowing facing the exit. where we said that he's only chayiv if he delayed a certain amount of time. Not if dem ganzen din von dieser Shehia, was hat gesagt in der Friedeke Halacha Kanal. And the same thing would apply to the general prohibition of lingering while tamei in the Beis Hamikdash, which was mentioned in the previous halacha. Ve'aser lelisha, so one is not allowed to linger. Ve'imsha, and if he did linger, he is chayiv. Ober. So if this shear it applies to both. So why does the Rambam mention or introduce rather the amount of shehiyah and ishtachava, the amount of lingering and bowing, only after he introduces the second case, which is the person who bowed facing the exit? And why does the Rambam not introduce this in the previous halacha when he told us the very concept of the prohibition of lingering in the Beis Hamikdash while tamei? The Rambam says one is not allowed to linger. Excuse me. V'imshah, and if he did linger, then he's chayiv either karis or a carbon. And right away, you should have said the kamashir shi yasek delikra. And at what point does he become chayiv? After how much time of lingering does he become chayiv? The amount of time it takes to read the pasuk vayichru. Why does the Rambam not tell us anything about shehiyah in the previous halacha, and only in the second halacha, halacha chav gimel, where he introduces the halacha of the person, the scenario of the person bowing facing the exit? Only there does he introduce shir shehiyah. So these are the two questions on the Rambam. Why in both are in halacha chav gimel? Why does the Rambam say elam kein shah kashir and not say kashir ishtachavaya? And and then bring in ishtachavaya only after the answer of the shehiyah, where he could have just said elam kein shah kashir ishtachavaya and then say the kama shiura or kama shir shehiyah v'ishtachavaya. Why does the Rambam sort of break apart the shehiyah and the ishtachavaya? And why does the Rambam introduce the shir, the amount of shehiyah, in this halacha and not in the previous halacha when he first introduced the prohibition of shehiyah in general? So we have the questions on the Kesef Mishnah. How does the Kesef Mishnah reach the conclusion that he does with regards to the various different opinions about how much is the time of shehiyah, which part of the pasuk is read how much of the pasuk is read to understand the amount of shehiyah? We have two questions on the Rambam. Number one, why does the Rambam say that? Why does the Rambam sort of separate shehiyah and ishtachavaya, and why does the Rambam not introduce the shir shehiyah until the last halacha on this topic? The Rabbi is going to begin the beer, and in doing so, and in order to do so, the Rabbi is first going to make sure we understand the halacha, what the Rambam is telling us with regards to the three examples: shaha, hishtachave, or yatsa b'derech haruka, lingering, bowing, or going out in a longer route. From Pashtus Lashon Rambam, when you look at the words of the Rambam, where he says this person who became tamei is not allowed to linger, is not allowed to bow, and he's not allowed to go out in a longer than necessary route. And if he did do so, he did delay, he did linger, or he did go out in the longer route, even though he didn't stop at any moment and just linger, but he ended up going through a longer route. Or he bowed facing the heichal, even though it didn't take him any extra time. Chayiv kares is chayiv kares. Is moving from the way that Rambam structures this wording. It's understood da is nit ein chiyuv. We're not discussing that there's one overall prohibition, but that he didn't go out as soon as possible. Which can play itself out in three different scenarios, either shah or ishtach v'yatsa derech haruka. We're not saying there's one iser. The iser is to spend any extra time. So how would it happen? For example, this. For example, that. That's not the pshat in the Rambam. Nor it says drei bazundere isurim v'chiyuvim, drei bazundere shemes. There are three different prohibitions here, three different causes here that would make him liable to punishment. Three different names. One, achiyuf un shehiyah, there is a prohibition of lingering in the Beis Hamikdash, even if you're not doing anything, mitzat zman v'zer sich verzamt in Mikdash, because the time that he lingered in the Beis Hamikdash. That's one iser. If he bowed, even though he didn't linger any extra time, but he bowed, the very idea of bowing in the Beis Hamikdash while tamei is an iser unto itself. And even if it didn't take him any extra time, but he chose a longer route, which means to say, even if he didn't stop along the way, he went straight to the exit, but he went to a further exit, there's an isser in how he goes out, what route he chooses, there's an isser to choose a longer route. So based on this, until this paragraph, I might have thought that all these scenarios, they intermingle. The important thing is get out as soon as possible. Now the Rebbe explains to us, and in a sense is being mechadish to us, that there's three separate isurim here. There's an isur of shehiyah, there's an isur of ishtachavaya, of bowing even though it doesn't take any extra time. There's an isur of going out in a longer route. And based on this, we can explore. What is the din of the case? This is the case of Rava, which we're going to soon see, the Gemara of Rava. And this is the case of Chav Gimel and the Rambam, when the person bowed, but he was bowing facing the exit, away from the Kodesh HaKadoshim. But there is Chayiv Norv Shah Kashir, which as the Rambam says, and as the Gemara, as Rava says, he's only Chayiv if Shah Kashir, if the bowing lingered a certain amount. Mitzad velchen shem is chayiv. Two things happened over here. He bowed. Yes, he bowed the wrong direction, so it's not really considered bowing, but he bowed, and he was shah kashir. He also was there for extra amount of time. He lingered. He was bowing while he was lingering, but he was lingering. So now the question is, off of which prohibition is he now liable? We could see this, we can learn this in two different ways. Aleph, number one, that Isser v'chiv insad ishtachava. The prohibition here is the fact that he bowed. But if he was facing the wrong direction, then we can't really consider it bowing, because it's missing something. The proper bowing is when you're facing the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So if you're facing the other direction, to say that this is a typical bowing, you can't say that. But when Shah Kashir, then you say he's chayiv. Mitzad ishtachavoya. In other words, it is considered bowing, and the obligation and the liability is because he bowed, but the liability only kicks in once he bowed long enough, kashir. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is, there's no issue of ishtachavoya here. Bowing facing the exit is not bowing. And therefore he's not chayiv because he bowed. Nor mitzad shehiyah. It's because of the lingering. Lingering itself is aser. If a person bowed down as he was going out of the Beis Hamikdash and he was facing the exit of the Beis Hamikdash, the fact that he was in a bowing position is not an issue because he's facing the wrong way. But because he was shah kishir, because he lingered, he's chayiv for the lingering. These are the two different ways. And in Sif Daled, the Rebbe is going to tell us what is the halachic relevance between these two ways. At the end of the day, the halacha is the same, seemingly. Yeah, that if you linger, you're chayiv. If you don't linger, you're pater. So what will be the difference if it's under the name of shehiyah or under the name of ishtachavoya? And that the Rebbe is going to teach us in Sif Daled. But before we get to the nafmin al-halacha, the Rebbe is going to show us that the Gemara, that where Rava introduces this concept of bowing in the wrong direction, there's two lishonis, there's two ways how the Gemara presents Rava, and many of the Mefarshim ask the question, what's the difference between the two ways if they both end up with the same conclusion? And the Rebbe is going to show us that these two approaches, that one says you're chayiv mitzad ishtachavoya, and one said you're chayiv mitzad shehiyah, those are the two lishonis in Rava. This is the difference between the two versions in the words of Rava. If the Mishnah the Mishnah, it says if a person bowed or he lingered the amount of time it takes to bow, then he's chayiv. Zog the Gemara, Amar Rava. Now we're going to learn a shtickle Gemara here. Amar Rava says, Rava says that which the Mishnah says, that if a person bowed, he's chayiv, is only if he was facing inward, facing the Kodesh HaKadoshim. But if he was bowing facing the exit, then he's only chayiv if he lingered. But if he didn't linger, if he just bowed and went out, he's not chayiv. That's Rabbi. So Rabbi is introducing. We spoke about it already, but in the context of the Gemara, Rabbi is introducing a new scenario: a person that is bowing facing the exit, and he says that which the Mishnah says that ishtachava is a problem is only if he's facing inward. But if he's facing the exit, then he's only chayiv if there was also a shehiyah, also a lingering. There are those that learn Rav's addition on the second part of the sentence of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, or he lingered the amount of time it takes to bow. That would imply that bowing has a time frame. Omar Ravas on that implication says, when do I say that bowing has a time frame? Only if he was facing the exit. But if he was facing inward, even if there was no extra time, he's still chayiv. And this is what the Mishnah is saying. If he bowed facing inward, or he bowed, or he lingered the amount of time that it takes to bow while he was bowing facing the exit, chayiv. Then the Gemara is going to tell us what's called bowing that has a time and bowing that takes no time. The question is, my beinayu, what is the difference between the two opinions and other? Both have the same halacha conclusion, that when it comes to bowing facing inward, you're chayiv even if there was no shehiyah, just for the bowing itself. And if you're bowing facing outward, you're only chayiv if there was a shehiyah, if there was a lingering while bowing. So both opinions agree. So in that case, why would the Gemara bring another version if the conclusion is the same? And the Rebbe brings in the Ha'aris that this is not the Rebbe's, only the Rebbe's question. Many of the Mefarshim on the Gemara asked this question. But based on what we said earlier, that there's two ways of understanding the Isser of bowing, facing the exit, and lingering while bowing. When facing the exit, there's two ways. Either the Isser is Ishtachavaya, there's a problem is bowing, but it only becomes chayiv once he takes a certain amount of time. Or you could say that it's not about the bowing, it's about the lingering. Now that we see that there's two ways of understanding this, Yesh Lema, we can say, as there my beinayu tzvishn ditzei l'shenis, is that this is the my beinayu, this is the difference. This is the halachic difference between the two opinions, the two versions of Rava. Late in Erishton Loshin, if you follow the first opinion, the version of Rava, as divrei Rava gate after Varti Shtachava Shebereisha, the Rava's words are directed on the word ishtachva, the person bowed. That it's only considered a bow if he was facing inward towards the Kodesh Kodashim. Kumtois, that would imply as klapi chutz as netad ganze geder von ishtachava. If you're facing the exit, it's not bowing at all. It's not considered. Does not go under the category of bowing. And that's what Rava means when he says at the end of the first version, that if he bowed facing the exit, then if he delayed, if he lingered, he's chayiv. If he didn't linger, he's pater. As klapi chutz is the northern gederachim mitzat shah. That if he's facing outward when he bows, there's only a problem of shah, of lingering. There's no issue of bowing. Ukilashon Rashi, and this fits perfectly in the words of Rashi. But if he is bowing, facing any other direction other than Mizrach, which is where the Kodesh HaKadoshim is, it's not a bowing. And if he lingered while bowing, the amount of time it takes to bow and he's facing the exit, he's chayiv for the lingering. And if he didn't linger, then he's not chayiv. So we see clearly that even in the words of Rashi, the way Rashi explains this Gemara, that the issue here is the lingering and not the bowing. Once you're facing the exit, says this version, says this opinion, it's not considered bowing. The only chiyuv is lingering. Late in zweiten lashon, but in the second lashon, ados gate after seifer. Oy shesha b'chdei ishtachava miklal d'ishtachava gufa baya shehiyah. That the Mishnah says if the person lingered the amount of time it takes to bow. And the Gemara says that from this we understand that ishtachava needs shehiyah. That implies that even if you're facing the exit, there's still a concept of bowing. Rava is saying that when do I say that ishtachava needs shehiyah? When you're facing outward, when you're facing the exit, implying that is considered ishtachava. It's just that it also needs shehiyah. But there is an issue of ishtachava here. It is considered bowing. And the prohibition is one of bowing. Nor the ishtachava klapi chutz is davke dam ben ziyat shehiyah. Shehiyah ishtachava. It's just that you can only be chayiv if it has the amount of bowing. But what did you do wrong? You bowed. You didn't just linger. You bowed. This is the second lashon. So the first version in Rava holds that ishtachava, that facing the exit is not ishtachava. It's only shehiyah. That's clear from the words of the Gemara, from the words of Rava, as well as from the words of Rashi. The second version that says that ishtachava requires shehiyah, when we're talking about facing the exit, means that it's ishtachava. We're giving it the category of ishtachava. It's just that it also requires a shear. But clearly, the two versions are taking the two sides of the previous mentioned debate. Is the bowing facing the exit an issue of bowing in the Beis Hamikdash while tamei, or of lingering in the Beis Hamikdash while tamei? The first says it's lingering. The second says it's bowing. And this too fits into the words of Rashi. Why? Because of Divrei Gemara in the Mitzvah Lashon, v'hachi k'amar, hishtachva klapi pnim, oy sheshak teishtachva, b'hach hishtachva de klapi chutz chayiv. The Gemara says that this is how you would read the Mishnah according to Rava. That if the person bowed facing inside, or he bowed facing outside and he lingered the amount of time it takes to bow, then he's chayiv. That's what the Gemara says. Dr. Rashi, v'hachi k'amar, hishtachva klapi pnim, koldu. If he faced inward, even a drop. Or he didn't bow, but he lingered the amount of time that one would have to wait when bowing facing the exit, which has a shear that makes him chayiv. Move on. What does Rashi mean when he says the amount of becoming obligated for bowing? According to Rashi, previously, there is no concept of ishtachava when facing the exit. Rashi should have referred to this as he delayed or lingered the amount of time that's called lingering. Rashi says the boy shir chiyuv. He should have said the boy shir shehiyah, because according to Rashi, as we understand from the first lashon, the issue here is shehiyah, not ishtachava. But based on this, we can understand that Rashi is explaining the second opinion, and according to the second opinion, even when you bow facing the exit, there is a chiyuv of ishtachava, not just shehiyah. It's just that the ishtachava has an amount. There has to be an amount of time that he's bowing in order to trigger the chiyuv, the liability. But we see the way Rashi chooses his words when explaining the second lashon, that the second lashon holds that the isur here is ishtachava, not the isur of shehiyah. So we've established that there's two opinions. There's two ways of looking at this prohibition. The fact when a person bows facing the exit of the Beis Hamikdash, one is that the issue is shehiyah, the fact that he lingered. and the bowing means nothing. And two, that it is a problem of bowing. It's just that he doesn't become chayiv until he bows for the amount of time that it takes to linger. Now, in the brackets, the Rebbe says, really, not only the halacha, like what exactly is the difference how he phrased it. At the end of the day, if he was shoyha, if he lingered while bowing, he's chayiv anyway for the lingering. So who cares? Why create a new Isra v'shtachava? He's already chayiv for the lingering. And the Rebbe is mechad is something very, very unique. Now, even though if he lingered without bowing, he's already chayiv for the lingering. So what's the uftu over here of the bowing? We could say that the second opinion is going to hold. Since, as we said in the beginning of the seif, that there's a separate Isra of Shehiyah and a separate Isra of Ishtachavoya, is it Isra Davka when Omad K'dei Shehiyah. The Isra of Shehiyah is when he stood in this place not doing anything and lingered for that amount of time. In other words, if a person was doing other things, then he might be chayav for doing the other things, but it's not called lingering because he's doing things. If he's doing something, for example, he's bowing, but it loses the concept of shia. Shia means he lingers. Lingers usually is a word that you would use when you're not doing anything. When you're doing, it's not called lingering. When you're doing something, you're getting something done. If you're saying a person is not allowed to linger, this lashon would say that it means he shouldn't linger and do nothing. But if he bowed at the time, that's not called shia. When the chiyuv damol says nit mishum shia, and the chiyuv now becomes. It can't be for lingering because he was bowing while lingering, and therefore it's not considered lingering. The chiyuv, the issue is the prohibition here is that of bowing. Okay. So as promised, Nesif Daled, the Rebbe is going to explain to us an afkamina lahalacha. What would be the halachic relevance between if you say that the problem of bowing facing the exit is an issue of hishtachavaya, of bowing, or issue of shia, issue of lingering? So the Rebbe is going to suggest one of what there probably are others, as he says, Eina fundi nafkaminas bepeil, one of the position a practical application, a practical relevance. The Gabi Chatzi Shir was Kaimalam Rabbi Yechanan as Chatzi Shir Osman HaTorah. There's a concept of called Chatzi Shir, where the Torah says that there's a certain, in order to be over something, for example, in order to be over eating something else, you have to eat a kazayas of it. If you eat less than a kazayas, it's not punishable. So the concept is Chatzi Shir. If a person did something, but he didn't do the Shir. So we're going to follow in the opinion of Rabbi Yechanan that it's Osman HaTorah, which means to do an act that is forbidden, even if the act requires a certain amount to become chayiv, and you don't have that amount, you're still not allowed to do so. So, for example, you're supposed to fast in Yom Kippur, you're not allowed to eat the kazayis within a certain amount of time. So, a person ate a half a zayis, so it's for sure not punishable because he didn't do the chiyuv, he didn't do the iser. What happens? Is he allowed to do it? So Rabbi Yechanan says no. Even Chatzishir Asam Atayr. And now we're gonna follow the opinions that this concept of Chatzishir applies even at non-food items. Like the Rebbe is going to give an example in a moment, carrying from one domain to another domain, which has nothing to do with food. But Chatzishir Asam Atayr even by non-food items. Is Yodua as the Isser is Narvan, this is Chatzishir. We know that this applies only when what's lacking is in the quantitative amount that is required for this malacha or for this thing. It says, you're doing the deed. Now, the shir is but the amount that you're doing it with is incomplete. For example, you're eating a half a zayis, which is a measurement of something prohibited. Or you're transferring something from one domain to another domain, from a private domain to a public domain, but it's smaller than a groigris, a date, which is the amount that makes you chayiv. So you're doing the whole act of carrying. You're picking it up in one domain, you're crossing over the border into the other domain, you're putting it down in the other domain. So you're doing the entire act of transferring domains, but you're holding something that's less than the amount. But if what's lacking is not in the amount of what you're doing or eating or holding, rather, not in the etzem ma'isa, you didn't finish the deed, if you maybe, I don't know if this is a good example, if you chewed it and didn't swallow it, or something like that, or you did an akira, you didn't do a hanacha, you lifted it up, you didn't put it down. Al derech chatzi melacha, so it's not chatzi shir. It's not that you're lacking in the amount of what you're working with. You didn't finish the deed. You didn't do the whole act. Then what does a nit aser min ha-Torah? Then it's not aser. So chatzi shir is aser. If you do the whole act, just not with the right amount of material, then it's chatzi shir, which is aser min ha-Torah according to Rabbi Yochanan. But if you had the right amount, but you didn't do the whole act, then it's a chatzi melacha, and that's not aser even min ha-Torah. That's even min ha-Torah, it's not aser. But it didn't done. So let's apply this to our case. Following the first approach in Rava, that the Isser is Shehiyah, as the Isser v'chiyuv is Mishur Shehiyah, is Eibs is Veiniger from Kedei Shehiyah. If it's less than the amount of time that it takes to linger, it is Titki Chatzi Shir. It's not called less than the amount. Nor it says the act wasn't done. For Shehiyah is Nita Kamas Diki Medida was Welt geschaffen, was Tzirif Chalki isn't done. Shehiyah lingering is not a quantitative measure that's made up of a bunch of particles of time. Shehiyah is a situation that becomes after a certain amount of time was passed. Lingering means, if you're there for let's say lingering time is 10 seconds, and you're there for 5 seconds. 5 seconds is nothing. You in and out. It doesn't count as lingering. The whole idea of lingering is that there was amount of time that passed. So therefore, less than the amount of shehiyah is not a chatzi shir. It's a chatzi melacha. Weniger davon heißt das nicht kein shehiyah. But meila hat kein Sinn. It's sagen chatzi shehiyah. Less than the amount of time designated is not lingering. Period. And therefore, there's no such thing as a half a linger. So according to the first opinion in Nova, that the issue here is shehiyah, then if the person lingered but not the full amount, then it's not aser min ha-Torah. Not only is it not punishable, it's not even aser, because there was no shehiyah at all. Shehiyah only becomes a shehiyah once the full amount of time passed. But if you're going to say that the issue here is really the bowing, it's just that the bowing requires a certain shear of what makes it considered bowing, and that shear is shehiyah. Is the bowed as the chiyuv is nipishum the matziv shehiyah. The shehiyah is not a shear chiyuv in the shtachava, since the prohibition here is not because of the lingering. The lingering is only the measurement of the bowing in order to know whether you're liable or not. So if you have half the amount of time of lingering, it's still part of bowing. It's lacking the amount of time it would take to obligate him, to punish him. But it's still the act of ishtachavaya. And therefore, even if it was less than the amount of time, it would still be prohibited. You wouldn't punish him because you could only punish once he has shir shehiyah or shir chiyuv. Only once you bowed for the full amount of time. But if you bowed for less amount of time, even though we can't punish you, it's still considered chatzi shir. It's still meaning to say that the deed was done, just not for enough time, and therefore, according to Rabbi Yochanan, it would still be aser to do so, not punishable, but aser. So with this, the Rebbe gave us a deeper understanding into this debate. Is it shehiyah or is it shtachavaya? What's really the difference? How does it matter practically? And the answer is that it matters practically in a case where a person lingered while bowing on the way out of the Beis Hamikdash, and he was tamei, but he didn't linger the full amount of time. According to the second approach of Rava, is aser to do so. According to the first approach in Rava, it is not aser to do so. Not only is it not punishable, it's not aser, because as long as there was no shehiyah, there was no shehiyah. Atkan is the understanding of the Gemara. In other words, we brought that according to the Rambam, there's three separate isurim. But if there's 3 separate Isurim, then we have to know that when the person is facing the exit, which Isur does it go under? We brought 2 opinions. We fit those 2 opinions into the Gemara. We explained what is the practical application of those 2 opinions in Halacha. And now we're going to continue to go back to the Rambam. But before we get back to the Rambam, the Rebbe is now going to introduce a 3rd approach. One approach was the issue is Shehiyah. Another approach is the issue is Ishtachava. It's bowing. It's just that you don't become chayiv until you bow the amount of time for lingering. Now the Rebbe in Sifei is going to introduce a 3rd approach, sort of in the middle of the 2. We can learn a 3rd way, 3rd approach. That even if the person is facing outward, facing the exit, the obligation is not because of the lingering, it's because of the bowing. The lingering is not an amount of time that tells us when he becomes chayiv for the bowing, nor the shehiyah macht uf dem shemish tachava. The lingering creates the concept of bowing. On its own, bowing facing the exit is not in the category of bowing. But when he lingered, the amount of time it takes to bow, or he bowed, the amount of time it takes to linger, this creates bowing, and now he's chayav for the bowing. So in other words, the Isser doesn't become until you have both. So if a person bowed facing the exit, one opinion said it's the problem is Shehiyah, he lingered. If he lingered, he's chayav. Another opinion said the issue is bowing. He was facing the exit. Okay, but if he was there long enough, Kedei Shehiyah, then he's chayav. Now we're saying that when bowing, it doesn't become considered bowing until after he lingered, until after he bowed for that amount of time. When you have Shehiyah and Ishtachavaya together, that creates Ishtachavaya. That creates the problem of Ishtachavaya. So it's not an issue of Shehiyah. It's not immediately Ishtachavaya and then you have to wait for the shear. It's nothing until the shear passes, and then because you had Shehiyah and Ishtachava together, that creates Ishtachava when it's Klapi Chutz, when it's facing the exit, and then he becomes Chayiv. So this is a different approach, which means to say that according to this approach, if a person bowed, but didn't bow for enough time, then he didn't do Ishtachavaya, and he didn't do Shehiyah. He didn't do either of them. But when he did when he did both, then it goes into the category of Ishtachavaya, of bowing in the Beis Hamikdash, and he is Chayev. Shleimar, and das ist Shittas Rambam. This is the Shitta of the Rambam. So now that we introduced this third approach, the Rebbe is now going to say that this is the Shitta of the Rambam. And therefore, and this is going to answer the questions we had on the Rambam. And the Rebbe reviews the questions here in this paragraph. Aleph, it is medayik in der halacha lehachsir panav alishtach v'derech etziosek klapi chutz. The Rambam says that if he didn't turn around, but he bowed while facing the exit, ein chayiv elim kein shah kashir, is only chayiv if he delayed, if he lingered the right amount, and he doesn't say kashir is tachavaya. Beis, the second point, bringt shir sheyosek delikris yuchrapaim arza alodis bevistach v'vedis lashem kitev gilum chasta. He brings the amount of shehiyah with the pasuk in this halacha nitfrier v'neretek in the misesmus isha shehiyah, not in the previous halacha when he discusses the general concept, the general prohibition of lingering. And Gimel, this is really part of Aleph. Firt uis v'zeu shir ishtachavaya. He only after giving us the shir does he say this is the amount of hishtachavaya, the amount of bowing. And doesn't say it earlier when he says Shah Kashir, which these were the points that the Rebbe brought up earlier in Sif Beis. And the next 2 paragraphs, the Rebbe is going to say, based on the fact that we're talking about the third Oifen, we'll now understand why the Rambam structures his words the way he does, to both negate the first opinion in Rava, that it's inyan of Shehiyah, to negate the second opinion of Rava, that it's inyan of Ishtachavaya, but it requires the shear of Shehiyah. Let's see it inside. Weil wenn der Rambam wollte gesagt, Elim kein Shar Kashir Ishtachavaya on dem Uisir Zeh Shir Ishtachavaya, had the Rambam used the word Ishtachavaya right in the beginning, and it said that the person who's facing the exit is not chayiv unless he bows for the amount of time it takes to bow. Volt men gilerin, you would have understood as klape chutz is da agade von ishtachavaya, that when facing the exit, when bowing facing the exit, it is in the category of bowing. Not as darv zayin atziru of pizas zayin ashir chiyuv, but it has to be an amount of time that create an amount that makes him chayiv, which is the second opinion. That if the Rambam would have said the words shah kishir hishtachavaya, that would say that there is a geder of ishtachavaya here, which has a shir. The Rebbe zog the Rambam ein chayiv alim kein shah kishir. Therefore, the Rambam doesn't use the word ishtachavaya, because at this point there is no geder of ishtachavaya here, because he didn't. There was no shia. And the Rambam's approach is, as we just said, that until there's the shia, there's no geder of ishtachavaya. So therefore the Rambam says, kishir. It doesn't say shir what. Then he said, the kama shir shiyasei. And then right away he explains what's the amount kedei likres. And only later does he say, v'zeu shir ishtachavaya. Der mitzvah zer madis mit zachen. As mitzadatz is the talking together with shachval klapi chutz. By saying shah kishir and not kishir ishtachavaya, he's telling us that mitzadatz, that inherently bowing facing the exit is not together bowing. That's why he doesn't use the word ishtachavaya. But then after he tells us the shir, he says the word v'zeu shir ishtachavaya to tell us that b'shasa b'shah kishir v'der mita geder v'chiyuv mitzad ishtachavaya, that if you did shah kishir while bowing, that creates a prohibition of bowing. For shir shiyas is the liklis v'yichru apayim artzal ritzvah ishtachavaya Hashem kitev kinchastei kitlekamon. Later in Sivav we're going to discuss the what is the shir, what are the shiurim and the various different days that are brought in the Kesef Mishnah. So in other words, the Rambam in Halacha Chav Gimel, he begins to say that if a person faced the exit and bowed, he's not chayiv elim kein shah kishir, without saying shir ishtachavaya, because at this point there is no ishtachavaya. The fact that he's bowing is not bowing. The second opinion held that it was bowing. He wasn't chayiv because he didn't bow for long enough. According to the Rambam, it's not bowing, and therefore the Rambam can't say shir ishtachavaya. He says kishir, there's an amount. What's the amount? The amount of reading the pasuk of Vayichru, and then if you do that, v'zeu shir ishtachavaya. If you have that shihiyah while bowing, that creates bowing. That makes it a ishtachavaya. So the Rambam structured it this way and separates shihiyah and ishtachavaya, and as if it's two different things, because at this point it is two different things. When the person bows facing the exit, there is no ishtachavaya yet, until there was a shihiyah, and only after the shihiyah does the ishtachavaya become. And the far sagt, dass der Rambam hemshach der halacha v'oret v'gem shir shihiyah v'gem ishtachavaya derech yitziyasei. And this also explains why the Rambam tells us the shir shihiyah in the halacha where he's discussing the bowing on the way out, when he's facing the exit. Not in the previous halacha where he discusses lingering without bowing. V'ledas Rambam is the geder shir ishtachava nitztama geder v'chiv mitzat shehiyah. Nor dos the shir gufa shafta geder ishtachava kinal. Because the Rambam holds that the lingering is not a problem of lingering. If he's bowing and lingering at the same time, it's not an issue of lingering. So therefore, he doesn't want to bring in shir shiyasei by the lingering, because that would imply that if a person was there for that long, if he was facing the exit while bowing, that the issue is shiyah, which was discussed in the previous halacha. But when the past was learned, that doesn't need shayach get for shiyah shtachava. No, the shiyah is blazed b'chdei get for shiyah. If the Rambam put this pasuk where shehiyah is discussed, we would never know that you could create ishtachavaya through shehiyah. We would think that the person lingered that amount of time, that's shehiyah. But it's not ishtachavaya. When the Rambam brings it in the second halacha, it tells us that the shehiyah could create ishtachavaya. That when the person is bowing facing the exit for a certain amount of time, he actually creates ishtachavaya through shehiyah. The only way to have that implication is if the shehiyah is brought now in this case and not in an earlier case. Had he brought it in the earlier case, then we would have thought that the shehiyah is shehiyah, and if a person lingers that amount of time, he's over on shehiyah, not ishtachava, even if he's bowing facing the exit. And the Rambam wants us to know that no, that when you're bowing facing the exit, once you've lingered the amount of time, that creates an isser of ishtachavaya. So Ad Kan is the Havana in the Rambam. In the Rambam, with regards to what is the isser of bowing when facing the exit. Is it Shihiyah? No. Is it Ishtachava? Also not. When it's Shihiyah and Ishtachava together, then it goes under the gather of Ishtachavaya. Now we have to see the Shiurim. What is the amount of Shihiyah? Rambam said it was from the Pasuk Vayichru, but as we see, the Gemara brought two opinions. Bavli brings two opinions. The Yerushalmi brings two opinions. The Kesef Mishnah brings these opinions and adds another opinion, interprets the Gemara in a certain way. We have to understand what are the various different opinions. In order to explain the shiur, we first have to introduce a concept that requires some understanding. The Rambam brings in Hilchas Machalos Asuris that all shiurim are halacha l'meis mesinai. In halacha l'meis mesinai is netakim machlekes, and in the Hakdama of the Rambam to Perush Mishnayos, the Rambam says that when it comes to halacha l'meis mesinai, there's no arguments, there's no disputes about halacha l'meis mesinai. If halacha l'meis mesinai said that tefillin have to be black, tefillin have to be black. No one could argue about it. So the question becomes: how could there be an argument? What is the amount of bowing or lingering if we just said that there's no argument, no dispute with regards to halacha l'meis mesinai? Therefore, we must say the fact that in the case of the amounts of bowing or lingering are halacha l'meis mesinai, that's not b'chalal. It's a general rule. As that the delay, the lingering, has to be the amount of time it takes to bow. Is in Spanish. But how much does it take to bow? That was not conveyed by Moshe Rabbeinu. When the Farah is in the and therefore it is possible to argue over it. So now that we've created an allowance for the sages to argue about this amount, so we're going to say now that the different opinions as to how long is the amount of lingering or the amount of bowing is based on the three opinions that we've discussed over here when the person is bowing facing the exit but lingers while bowing. And to explain how we get to these three opinions, the Rebbe explains. When it comes to bowing Beis Hamikdash, there's generally speaking there's three elements. The cause, what brought about this bowing. For example, seeing the Shechina. The actual act of bowing. The duration of the bowing. During which one, for example, might thank Hashem or do something like that. So you have the cause, you have the bowing, and you have what's happening during the bowing. And this is the basis of the argument. If you're saying that the amount of bowing is under the umbrella of lingering, that if a person delayed the amount of time it takes to bow, then you are chayiv for the lingering. Even if he's facing the exit, as the shir ishtachavaya is with the shir from the ganze seder ishtachava mit klasim vatzevim mit al that. If it's a time thing, if you're focusing on the timing of it, then you have to give it the entire time. If you're going to say the problem is shihiyah, he lingered, he spent too much time here, then when you look at bowing, you look at the full time that it takes to bow, which includes all three details: the thing that triggered the bow, and what was done during the bowing, the duration of the bowing. But if you're going to say no, it's not about the lingering, then it's part of bowing. As opposed to shachava. If the idea of bowing is for bowing, then however long it takes to bow, which is a very, very small amount of time. But if you're going to see it, it's actually two things, that you need the lingering and the bowing to come together. Then it makes sense to focus on not just the bow, but the duration of the bow. If the whole idea is, and this was the third opinion we said before, that only once you have the lingering does that create the bow. So then it means to say you have the bow and the lingering together create the bow. So then what will be the time? The bow and the lingering, or the duration. So again, if you're looking at it as a lingering, then you want to look at it as much time as it takes, with all of the different moving parts. If you're looking at it as a bow, you look at the bow. If you're looking at it as the bow and the lingering together, then you look at the bow and the duration of the bow, which is the lingering during the bow. Now we can understand how these Amiroim, so the different opinions that we have in the time frames are dependent on which category you go into with regards to Shehiyah and Ishtachava. What is the issue? Is the issue Shehiyah, or is the issue Ishtachava, or is the issue Ishtachava and Shehiyah coming together that create Ishtachava? So now we understand like this, that how does the pasuk come in? They should have said 5 seconds, 10 seconds. How does the pasuk come in? This is not a study after Zman Ashir. It's not just a sign, an indication to remember the amount. Nor in dem pasuk vert nirmis der techen aplukta vifel is the shir shtachavaya. Actually, this pasuk tells us what the amount is. In other words, we would have thought that the argument really was amount of time, but in order for us to remember it, they use the pasuk as a reference. Says the Rebbe, no, the pasuk is actually the source, or at least, if not the source, at least he's going to use the word asmachta, at least something that we could lean on to glean the answer to the question. Das heißt, wie bald das Allah lewisch Messina sagt, dass Shir extei Ishtachavaya, uns ist leines Paris, was ist das Ishtachavaya. Since Allah lewisch Messina told us that the amount of lingering is the amount of time it takes to bow, but didn't tell us what the time of bowing is mistaber zu sagen, as ergens wo in Teire da remes was macht, wie viel ist Shir Ishtachavaya. Why would Moshe Messina not tell us this information? It makes sense to say that there already is this information in the Teire somewhere, and we have to find it in the Teire. Und der Rieber ist bei allem angenommen, als Remes auf dem Shir Ishtachavaya ist in dem Pasuk in Teire, wo es wird gesagt die Ishtachavaya schon bis zum. So all the opinions agree that where do we find in the Teire the source of what is the time of bowing? In the Pasuk where it discusses the Ishtachavaya, the bowing in the Beis Hamikdash. But they're going to argue in which part of the pasuk do we learn from. Now this argument, which part of the pasuk should I look at, is tolui in teichin akasav behesem seipukta anal and svara. Will depend on the meaning of the words of the pasuk as they can be applied to this three-way approach that we had in the previous column. Am I looking at all three steps of the bowing? Am I looking just at the bowing, or am I looking at step 2 and 3, the bowing and the duration of the bowing? And now we'll looking at the pasuk. We will now apply those three approaches in this pasuk that has now become the source of the amount of bowing in the Torah. In the pasuk, the pasuk has 3 parts. The beginning of the pasuk is that the Yidden saw the fire and the glory of Hashem come down in the Beis Hamikdash. That was what brought about, that's what caused, that's what triggered the bowing. They prostrated themselves and they bowed themselves onto the floor. That's the act of bowing. That they thanked Hashem for His goodness, for His everlasting kindness. That's their teichin v'atara from Ishtachava. That was the theme, that was the meaning of the bowing. And based on this, you could answer, you could explain different opinions. If you hold that the issue is that it's a problem of lingering, and you hold, like we said previously, that would mean that you hold that the amount of bowing is the entire bowing with all three elements of it. Then you would say that you have to read, the amount is the amount of time it takes to read the whole pasuk. Vuas is matur, dem ganzen seder ishtachava, where the entire order of bowing is described, the cause, the event, and the duration of the event. B'shas mis kelech chalas hakasuv, die Sibbe, was hat gebracht die ishtachavoye, I das der Teichen in Yashiva v'samikdash. Was is kelo dem ganzen seder. When you include the beginning of the pasuk, which is what brought about the bowing, then you have the entire event. The Sibbe, the Riyas Amber at its age, the cause, that which they saw, the fire coming down, the Riyas HaShechina, they saw the Shechina. The Ishtachava, und die Edav, das gebracht, the actual bowing, and the praise and the thanks to Hashem, the gratitude to Hashem that it brought about. If you're saying it's not about the lingering, then together for Ishtachava, it's bowing. Bowing is bowing. Demolt is mistaber, das ist die Kriya von dem Chelek HaKasav, was steht die Pulas Ishtachava, vayichru apayim arza ala ritzvah v'ishtachava. That it means, it's the part of the pasuk that discusses the actual bowing, which is the middle of the pasuk. But if you're going to go the third approach, that this is about the Ishtachava and the Shehiyah together, then it makes sense to say that it's not about you can't just read the part of the pasuk that talks about the bowing. No, was bringt dem Teichen kol hemshech Ishtachava, v'heides Hashem ketev kilem chaste, in dem drigt sich ui, so das is a Shehiyah dike Teichen dike Ishtachava. It makes sense that you should read the middle of the pasuk and the end of the pasuk, because then you have about the bowing and about what the purpose of the bowing, the meaningfulness of the bowing, because then you have a full bow, the bow with its duration, which is filled with the meaning and the purpose of the bowing. And then, so it doesn't say this clearly in the Sikha, but this is how I'm understanding. The Rebbe is not agreeing with the Kesef Mishnah that you only read the first part of the Kesef Mishnah, that you only read the first part of the pasuk. There's no opinion, the way explained in the Sikha, that says you would only read the first half of the pasuk. So which was introduced by the Kesef Mishnah. Because if you look in the actual Gemara, in the Bavli it says Kimemre the Haipsuka, which means the whole pasuk, which would be the opinion that holds that the issue is Shehiyah. The second opinion in the Bavli is that you read the second part of the pasuk, which is which is the Geder, the third approach, that it's Ishtachavoya and Shehiyah together. Then in the Yerushalmi, it brings the opinion of Reb Simon, who says only the words Vayichru kedei apayim arza, Vayichru apayim arza vayishtachavu, only about the bowing, because he holds that Ishtachavoya is the inyan of Ishtachavoya and nothing more. The Ravo in the Yerushalmi also says the second half of the pasuk, like the second opinion in the Bavli. So you're left. The only opinion that was brought by the Kesef Mishnah is the opinion that you read the first half of the pasuk. L'cha'eda, the Rebbe is not accepting that opinion. That is not the opinion. In a moment, we'll see why the Rambam goes this way. If you might say the Rambam is not taking the most lenient opinion, and the Rebbe will explain that in a moment in the end of Sivches. Before that, the Rebbe is going to explain how do we end up with differences in Bavli and Yerushalmi of opinions, and it's based upon the question how it's presented in the Bavli versus the Yerushalmi. As in Bavli bringt sich die Deck mit der Psuke von dem ganzen Pasuk. Moshe in Yerushalmi is an alle days no bescheichert zu sefer dikra von Vayichru na'alon. If you look, without looking at the specific opinions, you look at Bavli versus Yerushalmi, the Bavli brings an opinion that you say the whole pasuk. The Yerushalmi only brings the opinions of the second half of the pasuk. None of the Yerushalmi's opinions, none of the opinions brought in the Yerushalmi say that it goes with the first part of the pasuk. So what's the explanation? In Bavli is the lashon of kama shir shehiyah. The Bavli presents the question as what is the amount of shehiyah of lingering. Which emphasizes that we're leaning in the direction of the din shehiyah, that the issue of the lingering while bowing is a problem of shehiyah. And therefore, the Bavli brings in a pasuk that includes the opinion that it's about Shehiyah, and if that's the case, you would read the entire pasuk. In Yerushalmi aber is the Lashon Kama Hishir Shtachavaya. The Yerushalmi presents the same question, or almost the same question, but uses the word Shir Shtachavaya. Das Ageder von Ishtachava. B'meile wird dort gebracht nur all die Idees, das Lernen ab von die Chelek Yakosov, welche reden wegen der Puls Ishtachava oder Eich Techna Kanal. So therefore, the Yerushalmi also only brings the opinions that are focused on the Ishtachava, either the Ishtachava itself or the Ishtachava with its deeper meaning. But the Yerushalmi doesn't bring the first step of the pasuk, because the first of the pasuk is relevant to Shehiyah, and the Yerushalmi didn't ask about Shehiyah. They only asked about the Shtachavaya. Al Pisa Kumtoi, so that's what the Rambam paskin as a shir sheyosek delikas vikra paim arza al haritzpa v'yishtachavu v'hedus l'Hashem kitev k'nu chazdei v'zeu shir shtachavaya is nit nor v'aler paskin l'kula. The Rambam is not just passing the kula, which means within the Bavli itself. The Rambam is passing the kula because the first opinion said to read the whole pasuk, and the second opinion, 1 second. Sind wir paskin lekula, der weil das Rambam is das der tegen together von shir v'shir shtachavaya kanal. So the Kesef Mishnah says that the Rambam is being mekel. The Rebbe is saying it for a different reason. I'm not sure I'm not sure how to answer that nor. I just didn't get a chance to think about it. But the Kesef Mishnah says that Rambam is being mekel. According to the Rebbe, it's not because he's passing the kula, no, but the Rambam is does the teichen together. But since the Rambam took the approach that what is the isser of shiyah b'shas ishtachava, the fact that it is ishtachava and shiyah together, therefore you have to go with the pasuk with the duration that takes to do two things, ishtachavaya and the duration of the ishtachavaya. So the Rambam is teaching out of the pasuk based on his approach in the whole concept of Shehiyah based Ishtachava, and that's where the Rambam passes. That's where the Rambam passes the way he passes. Okay. If Tess is going to bring this down into Musar and Chassidus. The beer in the days of Derech HaMusar and Chassidus. Idea of ishtachava of bowing is bittul, total bittul. Yid surrenders himself to Hashem. And this can be broken down into 3 levels. A total surrender. When a person contemplates in his mind and in the greatness of Hashem, he sees very, very clearly the greatness of Hashem coming down. And this causes him to bow down in a manner of prostration, where it's a total shtachava. As if in ganzen he becomes totally surrendered to Hashem. Not just in his actions. There's an ganzer shir the entire figure of the person. Starting from his power, his faculty of pleasure and desire, which is in the head, until the lowest level, which is that of action. So the one level is a person is all in. He recognizes the greatness of the Eibishter, and he surrenders himself and every part of himself to the Eibishter. On the other hand, there's someone that does not experience this revelation. He doesn't have this seeing doesn't see the fire coming down. But nevertheless, he still bows. He forces himself to bow, which means that he at least surrenders himself on the level of action. At least he does the right thing, even though he doesn't feel it, he doesn't experience it, he doesn't understand it. He does the right thing. Am Yisrael, if we were to break this down in Jewish history, Is das al derech achilik just man bias man galus. This is the difference between the time of the Beis Hamikdash, time of galus. Man bias the goes begin like again the lukus kederach shval lidus kach lirois. In the time of the Beis Hamikdash, they're able to see godliness. So this seeing of godliness brought them to bow themselves down on the deepest, most level. He was totally surrendered and set aside his own existence. When in the time of Galus we can't see the signs. We can't go up and to be seen or to see and to bow. Is because we don't have the vision, therefore we can't bow properly. It's only very external, very superficial. He has other desires, he has other thoughts. But rather he forces his body not to rebel. But his real desires are not changed. So you have two extremes. Other nor the So the first way that we're referring to is the whole pasuk. In other words, he's seeing what he's seeing, he's bowing what he's bowing, he's doing what he's doing, his entire person, the whole pasuk. The second way is just the ishtachava. It didn't affect his midas, it didn't affect his seichel. It affected just the act of ishtachava. But both of these things, it's not the normal order of things. The first madrega that we're connecting with the idea of the lingering, which means we have the whole package. That's a very lofty level. That's beyond most people. Not at every moment is there this level of revelation, and not everybody could lift themselves up to this revelation. But to just bow is a low level. A Yid should always endeavor to try to raise himself up higher than that. That it shouldn't just be a bow. He forces his body not to rebel. A person should try, a person should try to get his heart involved. He should feel something. This is the third approach. He starts out by sort of forcing himself. But that brings to a v'hoides Lashem as in them a hergish nefesh. He begins to feel something from heido bittul Hashem. Heido, as we know, is a level of is a form of bittul. When you think gratitude to Hashem and accepting Hashem and bittul to Hashem. This idea that you start slow, but ultimately it leads to something where you could actually feel it and experience it in your own heart. This is something that is applicable to every single yid. Even though not everyone is able to give birth to be able to just contemplate on something and automatically feel a total bittul. But every yid has a natural bittul, which is and every single yid has the ability to awaken it and to reveal it. When a yid forces himself and he gives himself away, he surrenders himself to Hashem, ultimately this reveals this inner bittul that he has really from the gift from Hashem. This is why the Rambam paskins, which because Torah, the rule is according to the majority, and now it's talking to the majority. The Rambam says that the rule is, the halacha is, that the bowing has to come with some duration. A person should not suffice with just the actual bowing. A person should also incorporate to feel, to experience in his own soul the gratitude to Hashem. And this follows the Rambam Shita. But they're passing the Rambam rules. As I feel as Aid was mendarfim kefes I'm bezon shalakum. It's becomes a tzivya atera. That even a yid, even if he's on the level that he has to be forced in a bezdin to fulfill a mitzvah of the Torah, in this case it's to give a get. He's reitzu lasis kol mitzvahs. The Rambam says about this person that he wants to do all the mitzvahs and he wants to distance himself from the Avedas. And this is the true desire of every yid. Und der Vater viele wenn man ist im Käfer und begolli herzlich als ein Schreien Reitzani is nur mit die Kvier beschätem says Kriya Ba'al Bechitzenius, and therefore even when you force the person and when you look at it externally, it seems that the reason he's saying I want to do this is because he's being beaten. He's just bowing down externally with no feeling behind it. Paskin der Rambam as Adarabba Ein Za'onos Mimanu. The Rambam says that this person is it's because this person is onus. He's forced. He's forced to be this way. He says no yitzra yushatakve because his yitzra his inclination is stronger than him. The kivin shehukach tasha, and if he will be smitten until his yitzra is weakened, this is what his real desire is. When you force yourself a little bit, you uncover what you really want to do, who you really want to be, which is to do what the Eibishter wants. So therefore it is required that each person, that in this external bowing, which seems to be only in action, so bei sich me'ere sein und megale sein, bis as jemar, then bittul was is da be'ela mitzad pnimius nafshei, person should utilize this to awaken within himself and to reveal within himself that he should call out, meaning it's something that comes from the depth of who he is. He should call out this bittul. And when we work on this, when we endeavor to affect every single yid in ways of pleasantness and peace, that to weaken their Yetzirah, it's only because when you have to actually force it, then you need a whole bezin in the case of the person who hasn't yet given a get. But when you meet a yid in the street, you're able to weaken his Yetzirah. And that way we reveal the truth and the essence of every single yid's desire, which truly wants to do the mitzvahs and wants to stay away from the Averis. Is das Nachmer Memayr and Messiah to be Beis Hamikdash Lushi, this hastens the building of the third Beis Hamikdash when alle Eden will Eile Regel sein. When all Eden will go up for the festivals. When it's sein der Liros ul Ishtachvis lefanecha b'shleimus kedeboy v'beis b'chirasecha, and then we will able to see, we will able to actually bow down in the proper way in the house of your choosing, the Beis Hamikdash b'meheira v'yameinu mamash.